And with that, we're ready to begin the first webinar of 2023. Thank you so much for coming and joining us for today's BECC webinar. We're thrilled to be kicking off the webinar in such strong fashion this year. We've got a fantastic lineup for you today, and we're just about to get started here. Before we do, I just want people to maybe start answering one question in the chat for us, which is, what behavior are you working on changing? Are you tuning in perhaps because you're looking to change somebody's behavior or an organization, or you're trying to get people to act in a more sustainable way or invest in some new technology? What is it that you are trying to encourage sustainable change to do? Or in fact, another way of looking at it is, what do you think should be done? What is a behavior that you think needs to be changed to make the world a better place and more sustainable? Just pop that into the chat, and we'll, while we're waiting for everybody to sort of shuffle into the virtual room, we can start this conversation now. All right. Enable your community to be more walkable. Absolutely. Increase tax payment and responsive government services in reply. Interesting. That's from Kara Marshall, MJ Hanold. What kind of behavior do you want to see changed? What can people be doing to make the world a more sustainable place that might get benefit from this type of intervention? If you're not aware of how to use the chat, Zoom has a chat function. It's a little bubble. It looks like a word cloud sort of thing. Word, I don't know what you call it when you're in a comic book and somebody's talking. Jose Luis Ramos says, be more inclusive. Try to get people to become more inclusive. That's a very important one. Use gamification to promote more sustainable behavior. Address climate change and promote zero emissions vehicles. Absolutely. Claudine Schneider says consistency. Most people start a good behavior but don't stick with it. That's really important, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that. Catherine Harper mentions that we should get people to drive less and walk more. Absolutely. So a lot of transportation related ones, another one about EVs and driving in general. This is all great stuff. Thank you for tuning in and for getting the conversation started. Today's webinar is about changing transportation and energy use behavior, learning from Denmark and Australia. So let's get into it. My name is Reuven Sussman. I direct the Behavior and Human Dimensions program at ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. It's way too long a name. Don't bother even saying it. Just call us ACEEE. I co-chair the Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change Conference, or BECC, which is the sponsor of today's webinar. And this year's theme at BECC is driving transformation. Really excited about this year's theme and how important it is to make pivotal transformations now using behavior change. And if you didn't already know, abstract submissions are open now. So head over to beccconference.org and submit your abstract for a presentation or for paper before April 1st, 2023. And this year's conference has two components. The virtual component is this. You're looking at it right now. It's these webinars. We have a series of about 10 free webinars that will be happening all year, where you'll be learning from people that are doing the kind of research you'll see at BECC. And of course, we have the in-person event this year in Sacramento, California, November 12th to 15th, 2023. This particular picture was from our first in-person conference in 3 years here in DC. You can expect more of the same, only bigger and better in California. And of course, this is very important. We'd like to thank our 2023 sponsors. SMUD, our premier sponsor in particular, our marketing sponsor, the Energy Coalition, is always a very helpful partner for us. And all of the partners on the screen made not only the conference possible, but these webinars as well. If you're interested in sponsoring, there's an email address down there. You can get your name in front of hundreds of people every month and at the conference. And before we get to this month's webinar, I do want to give a shout out to our next month webinar. On March 15th, we just booked this. We're extremely excited. There's going to be a panel of anthropologists talking about energy futures, Anthropocene challenges, emerging technologies, and everyday life. That's a question. Natalie Ortar, Karen Waltorp, and Simone Abram, all from universities in Europe. So stay tuned for that. You can see the registration page in probably a few days or a week at beccconference.org. Now, most of you are probably seasoned Zoomers at this point, but just to be clear here, please remain muted. We love seeing your webcam. This is a very interactive group, and it's great to see who else is out there. So feel free to turn on your webcam, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Use the chat for both questions and discussion. I'll be monitoring the chat the whole time, and I'll be keeping note of all the questions that come up, and I'll ask them at the end of the presentation. So there'll be actually 2 presentations by 3 people, plus a moderator. At the end of that, we'll leave plenty of time for you to ask your questions, and I'll be keeping track of them. Whatever questions we don't get to, we'll send them to the speakers, and they can try to get back to you at a later time. So without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce to you today's webinar, Changing Transportation Energy Use, Learning from Denmark and Australia. And to get things going, I'm going to kick it off by introducing our moderator, Jay Cassirer, General Manager of Tools of Change website. Jay, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Reuben. So yeah, I'm real pleased to be welcoming our speakers today. For those of you who haven't been to our Tools of Change website before, I'll just give you a very brief introduction. This is a website that is there to support those of you who are doing behavior change work, social marketing work, whether it's planning a program, implementing it, evaluating it. And we've been going almost 30 years now, 29 since Doug McKenzie Moore and I started work on the original collection of case studies for the Ontario Ministry of Energy. If you go down in the middle where the icons are, you'll see the 3 main topic areas that we work on. The leaves for environment, the apple for health, the cone for safety. And we do have a planning guide. You can plan a program and then download that to your computer. We have topic resource pages. So for any topic, in this case, the transportation, you can go find out what's new on the site, what are the most recent case studies are in that topic area, and the most recent resources to help you with your programs indexed into consumer research, strategies and intervention, promotional materials, and training and toolkits. But the one thing that we're most known for is our case studies. Over 200 full-length case studies with impacts as well in the topics we were talking about. And within those, you'll see some of them that have these little compass-like insignia, and those are the landmark case studies on our website. These are the ones that are recognized for having, well, being social marketing approaches and programs considered to be among the most successful in the world. And how do we figure that out? We've got 3 peer review panels, one for transportation, one for building energy, one for anything else related to climate change, in mitigation and adaptation. And these panelists, like Reuven, thank you to AEEE for contributing Reuven as one of our panelists, and to Doug McKenzie Moore as another of our panelists. And they rate the case studies according to individual impact for an individual participant, overall impact of the program, innovation, replicability to other locations, and adaptability to other behaviors. And the 2 programs that we're going to hear from today, they scored the highest last year. In one with the building energy panel, the other with the transportation panel. So I'm pleased to be welcoming these 2 speakers, and I'm going to start by introducing Rebecca Russell-Bennett and Tim Swinton. Rebecca is co-director at the Center for Behavioral Economics, Society and Technology at Queensland University of Technology in Australia. And her research lies at the nexus of the social marketing / behavior change and services marketing domains, where she works with policymakers and nonprofit organizations to develop innovative solutions for social problems such as electricity use, educational disadvantage, alcohol use, and overconsumption of resources. She's conducted extensive research with consumers on trust in the energy system, energy policy, energy efficiency, and demand management strategies. In particular, Rebecca contributed to the design of the highly successful Reduce Your Juice, LIEEP, pilot program to support low-income renters to save energy and money. And that's the program you're going to be hearing about in just a minute. She has expertise in understanding consumers experiencing vulnerability and their energy concerns and requirements. And her co-presenter is Tim Swinton, who was the project manager responsible for creating and executing the Reduce Your Juice program with a talented multidisciplinary team of experts. Currently, he's working at Shell Energy, developing, financing, constructing, and operating solar photovoltaic, battery energy storage systems, and virtual power plant projects across Australia. And prior to this, Tim was an executive director in the Queensland State Government's Office of Small Businesses, leading work teams across the disciplines of program management, policy and strategy, and regional industry and engagement. He also spent 7 years at City Smart, which is where he helped develop this Reduce Your Juice program, but also a number of other award-winning innovative energy efficiency projects that together engaged over 65,000 residents and small businesses to deliver $39 million in annual direct cost savings. Please join me in welcoming Rebecca and Tim. Over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having us, and lovely to see you again, Jay. It's been quite a few years. Okay, so thanks for having us. So I come to you from the traditional lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people, and I acknowledge the important role that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play in not just Brisbane, but in Australia. Now you can see on the slide there some of our team members, and I just want to give a shout out to these key people who were involved in Reduce Your Juice: Rory Mulcahy, Ryan McAndrew, Neil Horrocks, the CEO of City Smart, and Joe Little. I think it's really important to give credit to all the people who were involved in this amazing program. Okay, so just a little bit of background. In Australia, like many parts of the world, electricity prices are increasing, and they've been doing so for the past decade. And there's increased pressure on consumers experiencing hardship. And when you combine this with the increased cost of living, the housing challenges that Australia is now experiencing, we've got a real pressure cooker here for people. In the electricity sector, there's been a recognised focus on both demand and supply. So it's about both sides of the equation working together effectively. And that's really the backdrop for Reduce Your Juice. Okay, so when we think about electricity, we know that most consumption takes part with very little conscious consideration of consumers and their usage. Most consumers don't wake up in the morning and say, hey, I'm going to really get engaged with my electricity bill today. They just want the lights to turn on. They just want to be able to boil the jug and have a cup of tea. So electricity is abstract, invisible, and intouchable. And as a result, it's considered a low involvement product. So we don't kick into much thinking until the bill arrives. So electricity is really bound up with routine and habit, and that creates a significant amount of challenge when you want to engage people actively to change their behaviour as their role in the energy system. And so that brings us then to Reduce Your Juice, which was led out of City Smart, which is Brisbane City Council Sustainability Agency. I was the research lead at QUT, and I also want to acknowledge BCM, the agency who designed the brand and managed the execution and delivery of the mobile games that were a central part of the process. So shout out there to Kevin Morland. Okay, so Reduce Your Juice was a digital energy savings program for young low-income renters in Brisbane. It was funded by the Australian government as part of the low-income energy efficiency program. So there was a pilot program a number of years ago to see what we could do that might work. And so there was a whole bunch of different types of programs, from retrofits all the way through to gamification, to see what can do. And the results of those reports are up on the federal government's website. So it was a research pilot to trial different approaches and then document. And one of the core aspects of the program was to involve universities and research partners, so that we could do solid evaluations and there could be a level of rigor around the impact created. And the idea was that the results were to inform future policy and development. And as you can see there, we had a range of additional partners with Reduce Your Use to help deliver this program. So the theoretical framework that sort of really underpinned the thinking behind it is the MOA model. Many of you who do social marketing will be familiar with this from Michael Rothschild's seminal Journal of Marketing piece. And it really looks at, depending on the combination of the motivation to do a behavior, the opportunity to do a behavior, and the ability to do a behavior, we have different solutions. And so for this program, there wasn't much motivation because people find energy to be a low involvement product. There was the opportunity to be energy efficient, but there wasn't the ability. And so I put us in cell 7 there, where people were resistant to behave. And the appropriate solution there is education or behavioral. So that's really where we went down the pathway of developing this program. So we're going to go through each of those 3 aspects in the presentation today. So I'll do motivation, then hand over to Tim to do opportunity and ability. So how do we motivate people to be energy efficient when they really don't care unless the bill has arrived? Well, we did a whole bunch of formative research. We spoke to people, we did surveys, we did extensive literature reviews, and these are some of the core things that come through. So there are cost of living challenges. When you're low income, you often spend more time at home. In Queensland, it's hot, we need air conditioning. There is a sense of a lack of control. What was interesting from the research is many of our low-income renters wanted to have a house that looked like they were middle class. In Australia, everyone aspires to be middle class. It doesn't really matter if you're lower class, upper class, everyone defines themselves as middle class. We found that low-income renters were very digitally engaged. They had lots of devices. They had multiple televisions. They were skeptical and they were financially motivated more than environmentally motivated. So this gave us the information that we needed to think about, well, what kind of solution could we do? And that really took us to gamification. And there was a whole backstory about how we ended up with gamification. We found it difficult to even use the word gamification. Gaming was not seen as an appropriate term, playing with people's money. But now it's a much more accepted term. And so what we needed to do specifically was to address the consumer barriers of disinterest in the behavior. We're dealing with a group level influence. This was something unique about our project, is we weren't targeting individuals. The bill arrives and it's for the house. You can't tell that little Johnny or little Mary in their bedrooms were the ones responsible for the bill. It's a whole group bill. And so the whole of group has to be engaged. And one of the most important things is there is a time lag between the behavior and the outcome. So in Queensland, the bill arrives 3 months after you've used the energy. So it's really hard to work out who did what and what was causing the problem. And so we needed to reduce that lag time between behavior and outcome. And so we knew or wanted gamification to support our participants to be engaged, to be ambassadors, to be action takers, to learn how to be energy efficient, and then take that learning into the real world and do those behaviors. We wanted people to feel empowered. We wanted them to feel energized and to feel proud and rewarded. So these were the behavioral outcomes that we were seeking from the gamification. And we had a look at, well, what would be then the best behavioral approach for us? And, from the learning psychology literature, we know that we can go 2 ways. We can do behavioral learning, or we can do cognitive information processing. And what we knew is that a lot of the energy efficiency programs to date had been focused on changing people's attitudes first and then hoping the behavior would follow. And what we knew from the literature and the science around learning is that when people are disengaged, trying to change the attitudes first and hoping that a behavior happens is really time intensive and often futile. And so what we decided to do was actually go the behavioral learning approach, which is where we change the behavior first, and from doing, people will then learn. And we combined this with the experiential learning hierarchy, where people do first, then they feel, and then they learn. And this was the opposite to the usual information processing approach that had been done pretty well everywhere in Australia, where let's do lots of advertising and marketing, communication, and educating to tell people what to do so that they then will do it. And so we really were reversing the process. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Tim, who's going to share his screen and take us through the rest of the presentation.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. So everyone can see there, that's great. So look, in terms of the opportunity, I think it's fair to say that we built on Rebecca's work there in terms of using that as our bedrock. So that customer insight and the theoretical framework really informed the solution that we created. So when we look at Reduce Your Juice, it's bright, it's vibrant, it's fun, but it's really, I think sometimes people underestimate it. People underestimate it as being simple, but I can assure you, whilst it's very simple and it's a great user experience, it's not simplistic. Everything was really well thought out. So in terms of behaviours, this is a key thing which everyone's trying to adopt here in terms of, how do we actually get someone to transfer a digital experience into their real life behaviours? So we adopted a community-based social marketing approach. We put together a list of over 100 behaviours, and we critically assessed them through the lens of our participant and through their experience and how they were interacting with electricity. And we really scored each one in terms of its impact, ease of change, and the complexity of implementation. And when we plotted those all out on the wall, we basically grouped those back, we grouped the highest ranked behaviours into 3 broad sections. So switching off, cooling, and washing. So we should note that Brisbane's a subtropical area, so it's quite hot here in terms of our environment. So cooling's a really important behaviour for us. So in terms of that, when we look at the game, I think the key thing with using gamification, or particularly at this point in time, was we're looking at a particularly vulnerable target group, and so the combination or the confusion around gamification or gaming and that target group was quite difficult for some of our stakeholders to wrap their heads around. And particularly when you're looking at energy, it's an expensive bill in the household, and when you're talking about a fun experience, sometimes these things don't really seem to come together. So in terms of when we were creating the program, it started with the game. The games were then created around those behaviours that we targeted. So temperature defending for cooling, power raid for switching off, and fully load around our washing behaviour. So how does all this work? So essentially, as Rebecca's outlined, we've taken a stealthy learning approach. So if you look on the right-hand side of the screen there, really what we're trying to do is to make it easy and fun and worthwhile for the participant. So our behaviour approach to facilitate learning and change really focused on that instrumental learning and an experiential learning approach, where if you start at the centre of that diagram, we're getting people to use the games to do something that's fun and entertaining as the start of the process. And then we wrapped our education around those elements and game elements. And as the people go through the game, they're rewarded, they earn points and trophies and little digital rewards, but also their learning opportunities are embedded within that game to really reflect on the behaviours that we're focused on. They receive some rewards and reinforce positive behaviour, lots of great positive messaging coming through that drives motivation. And then as participants were feeling more motivated, they actually moved their sense of control from feeling out of control into something, I can try this and I can actually implement it into our real life. And then from there, we transferred from the digital experience out into the real world. So in terms of ability, how do we engage people to be energy efficient? Well, when you think about the mobile phone, our contact today, or the traditional approach is that we would do face-to-face interventions. we would organise someone to come into someone's house, deliver a piece of education face-to-face, leave some glossy brochures for that person to digest and read through in their free time. The mobile approach was quite different in terms of that. So whilst we had the mobile phone from someone in their pocket, really what we wanted to do is make sure that we built up basic elements. So the gamification, building up communities through social media, creating information that we labeled power hacks and put a reframed around how we're going to deliver that education, but also make sure we're rewarding that behaviours around, you know, getting people involved and excited about learning about energy efficiency. So what did the game look like? Sorry, what did the program look like? So essentially what we went through is we recruited participants over a 4-week campaign, and then participants would come into this warm-up process, and essentially what we would do is get them to do our pre-program survey. From that, the cohort would start the program together. So all the units or the games were locked, and then we would unlock those, which built up this feeling of sense and anticipation around, you know, different gaming elements. And so each area had we allocated 2 weeks for each particular theme. Participants were required to play the games for at least 10 minutes across those 2 weeks, which created a 6-week program. And then we dispersed rewards strategically within each one of those units, as well as working towards earning a major reward at the end of the program. So in terms of elements, you know, there was the gamification, there were education points, and there were opportunities for them to actually go out into their real world and implement those opportunities. So how did we go? Look, I think this is a really interesting component. If we start at the start in terms of engagement, players played 5 times more than the minimum requirement. Participants were required to play for at least 10 minutes. On average, participants played for 158 minutes, but each game was less than 2 minutes, so 1.7 minutes on average. In terms of our reach, we engaged 1,800 people, but through our social channels, Reduce Your Juice was seen 1.8 million times. It reached 1.3 million people, and we engaged over 16,000 people through likes, comments, and shares. In terms of our response rate to communications, our open rate at the start of the program was around 40%, and by the end of the program, over 6 weeks, our open rate was up to about 90% on average. So this was really, really encouraging. And an interesting fact is that a typical participant over the 6 weeks received 339 touch points across 10 different channels. So it was a really engaging program. 97% of participants would recommend the program to their friends and family. So did we actually succeed in our goal, which was to reduce energy efficiency? The short answer is yes. So on average, participants reduced their energy bills by about $219, which is a great outcome for us. And just to contextualise that, that $200, our average participant had a $2,000 electricity bill, which was substantially higher than their peers in Queensland, which was $1,400. The other couple of call-outs I'd make in the results here was around improvements around habits, intentions, and giving up comfort, which I think when we think about energy efficiency, the cohort that we've got weren't confident about doing that. They had the basic knowledge, but they weren't implementing that knowledge into their everyday lives. So we had a couple of great feedback there from in terms of people who participated in the program. It was a great way to learn. It was a great way to get the kids involved and get the household involved in participating. So that's from one dimension, which is our participants. From the other dimension, which is our funding partners. So this was a federally funded program.
Hey, Tim, I'm sorry to do this, but we're going to have to move it along. If you could wrap up rather quickly, that'd be appreciated.
No worries. Last slide. So look, essentially from our funding partners, what we took out of this was for each dollar invested for this particular program, there was $1 returned. And we also modeled out the opportunity to scale this up to 10,000 or 100,000 participants, which is a key benefit of digital engagement. So at that point in time, we'll finish up the program, the presentation, sorry.
Yes, thank you so much. So now we move on to our next speaker. This next program focuses on transportation rather than building energy. And the speaker will be Henrik Lundorf Christensen, who's special consultant with the City of Copenhagen's cycling unit. Henrik is a political scientist specializing in cycling, specifically the international diffusion of public policies in cycling and sustainable mobility. He oversees the municipality of Copenhagen's participation in international cycling cooperation, such as C40 cities, EU projects, VeloCity Conference, and UCI Bike Cities, and serves as at the board of the Cycling Embassy of Denmark and the Danish Cyclist Federation, previously as an advisor at the Danish Ministry of Transportation and the city government of Buenos Aires. Please join me in welcoming Henrik Lundorf Christensen from Denmark.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to share a little bit about cycling in Copenhagen. I'll just jump into sharing my screen. There we go. And yes, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how Copenhagen became a cycling city. And I think it's a good contrast to the case we just had presented by my Australian colleagues, because that was a very, very specific measure with very defined measurables. This is more like the identity of a city. So I hope you can appreciate the difference, that this is a decade-long thing we've been doing. So I can't give you as a packaged a solution, but more like an approach to cycling. This photo shows a typical day in Copenhagen. We have a pretty horrible weather most of the year. It's raining, it's cold, it's windy, and these people are still on their bikes. It's also pretty dark now in winter, but they still get on their bikes. And to be sure, they don't get out of bed pitch dark in the morning, 7 o'clock when it's 0 degrees Celsius, to save the world, to be climate friendly. They do it because it's the fastest way to go to work or go to studies. Because we've made it that way. We've designed our city that way. And I haven't included that many photos of people cycling in my presentation, because if you want to see people cycling in Copenhagen, just Google it, Copenhagen cycling. There will be thousands of hits. But I'm going to approach this presentation more on general terms and what we've been doing on a general level. And then hopefully we can inspire some questions for the session later on the Q&A. But before jumping into it, I think it's very important to define why we're doing this. And these two photos shows a little bit of the results of cycling. The black and white photo being from the 1960s, when Copenhagen, just like any other city all over the world, was betting pretty heavily on car culture. And this is central Copenhagen, and I guess you can see from the buildings that this is a part of the city that was developed way before the cars were invented. So it's not a place that you're supposed to have a 5-lane highway. And with all the work we've done to promote not only cycling, but also walking and public transportation, you can have the colored photo from 2018, which is a lot of people walking around and enjoying their city. And imagine if they were all driving to the city, where would they park? So cycling helps us to create a better city, and that's basically the essence of why we're doing this. The development of Copenhagen bicycle infrastructure, which is typically based on bicycle tracks on the side of the road, it goes a long way back. And some of the first tracks were developed more than 100 years ago. That was basically old lanes for riders on horses that was being developed into cycling paths. So as you can see from this, the network has been expanding and expanding, and today it covers basically the entire city. Some numbers on cycling. You will see in the case study that Jay mentioned that it's referenced 49%. That's when you measure citizens of Copenhagen within Copenhagen. But to get like a general picture, because Copenhagen is the capital of Denmark, and of course it's the center of a larger economic region, we typically focus on all transportation, which means that we also have to include people commuting into Copenhagen from outside, basically not just our own citizens and taxpayers, but also people from outside the suburbs. And that makes the image a little bit murkier. So these are the numbers. We have a pretty high share of walking also, because the city is so dense, so a lot of people can walk to their destinations. Car traffic is around 30%, cycling around 21%, and public transport about 14%. And mind that these numbers are skewed also a little bit because of COVID numbers in 2021, but it's pretty evenly balanced between the four groups. And as you can see here, we have a goal, politically approved goal in the city, that we want maximum 25% of all trips in the city by 2025 to be by car. And then the other three modes that are considered sustainable, they should at least have 25%. And as you can see, we're developing little by little in the right direction. And of course, COVID made everything, because of so many people working from home, going a little bit in the wrong direction. But we do have pretty high shares for cycling, walking, and public transportation. But even though Copenhagen is known as the city of cyclists, we still have challenges. And this is the distribution of all the space within between the houses in the city. So even in a city famous for cycling, we still dedicate a lot of space for roads, for cars, and we actually dedicate more space for parking our cars than for cycling. And again, this is Copenhagen, famous for cycling. Imagine what it's like in cities that are not famous for cycling. So all this space, we're basically in a struggle to try to reallocate that for trees, for flowers, for playgrounds, for places for people. But yeah, little by little, we're getting there. I just shared this to let you know that not everything is perfect yet here. I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of how we've integrated cycling. And again, drawing on my background as a political scientist, but also because the design, it shouldn't be religiously followed one design of a bike lane or a bike track. You can go with a Dutch design, you can go with a Danish design, you can also go with a design that's more common in Northern America. That's not the important thing. The important thing is that when you do try to make bicycle infrastructure, you anchor it and you make sure you follow up. And the story of our cycling is that there was a goal made more than 10 years ago that we wanted to be the first carbon neutral capital of the world by 2025. We're almost getting there. And to achieve this goal, of course, we had to be the best city for cyclists. So that was a follow-up goal, that we wanted to be the best city for cyclists to achieve our carbon neutrality. And that has led to an investment the last 10 years of about 200 million euros in cycling infrastructure. For instance, building the bridge for cyclists and pedestrians that you see on this photo. And it sounds like a lot of money, but it's actually just a fraction of what is spent on car infrastructure, because it's really, really cheap to do cycling infrastructure. Our plans for cycling are integrated in different documents in the city that are all approved by the city government. You don't have to go deep into these. This is just the front page of them, but the argument I'm trying to make is that you need to make sure that the cycling efforts are anchored in government, so that when you have a change of government, you still have a commitment to the cycling efforts. And some of the documents we've been using are both a long-term strategy, but also some more hands-on planning documents. Where are we going to build the infrastructure? What are the standards? And of course, measuring, are we succeeding? But also we try to integrate cycling in other planning documents. So cycling shouldn't just be seen as a niche mobility thing, but also as something that helps to the general development of the city. Like when we develop a new area, we have to integrate cycling infrastructure. When you think about how to use the public space, cycling should be appreciated as a essential mode of transportation to arrive at destination. Traffic safety, we have a vision zero. Of course, cycling is safer because you go a lot slower than if everybody's driving a car. And with all these different political goals, we try to follow up on it. We have a little ways to go, but we're getting there. I don't think we should go through this slide in detail. I'll share it later with you. And again, some numbers about why people cycle. When we ask the Copenhageners, and we've been doing that for decades, they always say it's because it's easier and it's faster. It's becoming more popular to say we do it for exercise, but don't think of it as a sport activity. People go in their everyday clothes. You see people in suits and dresses going to work because it's just simple and convenient. That's why people go in by their bike to work. This is a point that we like to make, and it's not our point. We got this from Janet Sadiq Khan, former transport commissioner of New York, who was famous for using this quote, "In God we trust, but everyone else bring data." And that's really essential because a lot of people have a lot of opinions about cycling. I imagine in Australia, people will say it's too hot to go cycling, or there are spaces in the US where you would say it's too cold, or in Canada, or you will say it's too hilly, or you can always find an excuse for why you shouldn't be cycling, especially in your city. But there's only one way to answer that, and that's data. So we have data on everything related to cycling. We have data on how many bicycles are in the city, how many cargo bikes, what is the travel time to cross the city, what is the investment spent, but also how much money are we actually saving by people not being stuck in gridlock but riding their bikes. How many cars do we have? And when you have a lot of data and you've been collecting data for a long time, as we have, you can start by beating the opinions and actually coming with arguments. And that's how to integrate cycling in the city. For instance, when you referred to the slide I did before about the space allocation, you can make a better case about what's just, how is the distribution of space, what's fair? Is it fair that people park their car outside of the house, or is it fair that we plant a tree? So you need to count everything, and that's the best friend of cycling is to have data. Another example is that we try to map our city very detailed and have different typologies of how to attack the topic. And for instance, these are some GIS data about where to do bicycle parking, because we have so many bikes that actually some places it's a nuisance. Like you have them taking up valuable public space. So we try to categorize the city in spaces where we need extra capacity, for instance, at subway stations or train stations. We also try to engage our local residents, and the map to the left is the answers from 20,000 Copenhageners in a very simple survey. They had 3 options. This area needs a bike lane, this bike lane is too narrow, or this intersection has too much bicycle traffic. And when you map all these people that we asked, you get a pretty clear indication where we should go and build bicycle infrastructure. So that's also very essential, that if you want to have a successful cycling city, you need to ask your residents, where would you like to go, or where are you needing infrastructure? I'm wrapping up with a few examples of the regional perspective, because I understand that Copenhagen is a smaller city compared to some of the larger metropolis in the world. But we are trying to fix cycling challenges in around the capital region. Copenhagen is located in the Copenhagen capital region. And as you can see, we hit the 49% of cycling share back in 2018, and it's been falling a little bit the last few years. The reason being COVID, but also because we just opened a new metro line, and that was actually taking a little bit of modal share from cycling. But again, cycling and metros aren't the competitors. The big enemy for us is the car. And this slide shows the issue we are having, the red graphs being car traffic and the green being cycling. And as you can see, the middle ones, which is inner city traffic, we have cycling increasing a lot in the inner city, and we have car traffic decreasing, and that's what we want. We don't want cars in our inner city. But when it comes to the municipal border, which is people commuting in from the suburbs, we have an increase in car traffic, and cycling traffic is only slightly increasing. So what we're trying to do is to make it more attractive to commute from outside of the city on a bike. We're talking long distance, 15, 20 kilometers. What we're trying to do is to something we're called cycling superhighways, which are bike lanes where you don't have to stop at a red light. You can go straight and you connect the city straight. Maybe you go far away from traffic, and you can enjoy a podcast or basically just nature. So that planning requires, of course, our neighboring municipalities also buying into cycling. and investing and also having the same standard as the city of Copenhagen. And an example of a regional bike lane is this, next to the highway. And of course, it takes some effort to get dressed up. When you're commuting 20 kilometers, you're not doing it in a suit anymore. That is for people wearing more sporty clothes and taking a shower at work. But the potential is pretty big. And what we're seeing with this network of cycling superhighways is that the average commute is actually longer by cyclists than it is by people taking the train. So when you do make attractive infrastructure, you can make people use the bike really far. And as a last comment, I saw people mentioning EVs as a solution. Please don't forget, when you talk about Teslas, that the electric bicycle is a magical tool that can make people go really far, but it takes up a lot less resources. And that's something we're seeing, that it's making it much more attractive to commute far in Denmark, and that can also make it attractive to use the bike in very warm places. I guess I'll wrap up now. Thank you for your attention, and looking forward for the questions.
Henrik, that was wonderful. And I want to note that it's just so great and refreshing to hear such an international perspective. This might be the most international panel we've had on these webinars. We have Canada organizing, Australia presenting Reduce Your Juice, and of course, Copenhagen with the cycling infrastructure and cycling increasing. I think all of the presentation was super interesting, and there's been a lot of chat in the chat, a lot of discussion in the chat. So I'm just going to start, asking some of you some of these questions, see what you think. Well, first of all, to Rebecca and Tim, one of Rebecca's first points was who they were targeting with their work. And Peter Golan and Judith Black both mentioned something to the degree of, along the lines of, why did you target these people? And how do you change the behavior of these people? So Peter asks, why did you look at younger people and renters as opposed to, older or middle-aged people instead of homeowners? Judith says, a lot of people are renting. How do you get how do you change the behavior of the landlords, which is very important, and without making people who are renters feel like they can't do anything. Rebecca or Tim, do you want to address that one?
I might take that one, Rebecca. So look, in terms of the target audience, under the low income energy efficiency program, which was the Commonwealth government's program, they had specific groups that they were looking to target. Young adults was one of those particular target groups, and we define young adults as aged 18 to 35, located in Brisbane, or the local government area that was defined within the Bureau of Statistics. And low income, we went through and defined that as the lowest two quartiles of income. So in terms of that, there was some direction around specific interventions targeting specific demographics, and it seemed to be in terms of a logical fit around where a digital engagement approach would be most suitable for that audience. Subsequent to that program, we've rolled it out to broader audiences, and it still had that same appeal.
Thanks, Tim. That's great that you're looking beyond the initial audience and scaling up, which I think is really important. And it's an important criteria for tools of change ratings. Henrik, there's been a whole swath of comments along this line, which is what Copenhagen did is incredible. Like, I personally am wondering, how did this culture of cycling begin? Was there a tipping point? Judith Black asks, notes that in the US, we have this automotive and energy lobbies that are like actively promoting the car, culture. Amy Cornelius says that, yeah, these need to be integrated into the city's plans. So they don't stop with a new administration. William Pevick says, in the US, we're so far behind Copenhagen in cycling infrastructure. How did you do it? Like, what is different there? Why is there a culture of cycling? Is it just the city's planning, or what is it that we need to know?
No, I think really we have to demystify what we're doing in Copenhagen, and also what our friends in the Netherlands are doing, because it's not something we have in our blood. It's not something in the water. It's just, of course, we are blessed geographically by living in two very flat countries. So we have that going for us, but the weather is not helping at all. So that's like a least likely case for us. I mean, I would rather ride my bike in Sacramento than in Copenhagen. I think we have to appreciate that. Yeah. Well,
We don't have that, but there are other reasons too. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think cycling was basically a global phenomenon about 100 years ago, before massive motorization was a thing. So I think everybody should look into the local archives of their city and check out photos from the 20s and 30s, because everybody was riding bikes. And then you're right, car and motordom became considered a blessing, and I guess it was in some aspects, but it just took it went overboard, and now we have to find a mix. People in Copenhagen still drive cars, because sometimes it makes sense, but you just have to find a solid mix. And I think some cities have gone too far, and that it's not so hard to actually reallocate the space. I mean, a lot of places you will have too much capacity in the road, and that leads to more aggressive driving. A lot of places you would be fine with just one lane, everybody with the speed limit of 30 or 40 kilometers an hour, and that would allocate the space to make wide bike lanes or wide sidewalks or nicer crossings. It's not really engineering wise. We're not talking about a lunar base. We're talking about some paint and maybe some curbstones. So it's pretty easy to make. I think the most important thing is that the vision kind of sticks, and then this argument about integrating it in civil society, talking to the private sector. Like the private sector in Denmark, they love cycling because they get more business. Like you can have so many more paying customers outside of your cafe, or you can have so much more parking spot outside of your supermarket if people go on a bike. So it really helps you. And I think, integrating in public policy, integrating in civic society, and then getting some data, and then you're rolling. And then don't spend too much time discussing the design of the bike lane. I mean, really, that could be made in so many ways. It's just about having some separation, and then you're good to go. Yeah, I don't know if that was the answer, but I'm trying to just let people know it's not mystic. It just get going.
If I can quickly add to that, I think one of the things that's so different is, first of all, the length of time, the persistence over which you have continued to implement year after year, change after change to make things easier. And so you keep finding ways to make it easier for people, like you say, and because of that, and quicker, they actually use the bike paths and everything. So, and part of that, I think, is the public account, where you have publicly made available all that information. Everyone can always go on and check and see how you're doing. You have a real strong, open commitment that has lasted for many years, and I think that has made a big difference.
Yeah, I think when you put out the data and it makes it publicly available, you can start a very good conversation. And I imagine that if you presented the citizens of Toronto with a space distribution between the houses, saying that we're spending, I'm just shooting off the hip, but like 72% of all our space in our city on road space, that would make people think. So yeah, get the data and start sharing it publicly, and then you're on the roll.
Henrik, just one follow-up here. Doug McKenzie-Moore asks, or notes rather, a social norms influence here, that over time, cyclists become important advocates for cycling infrastructure, and this is self-reinforcing, and then more people do the cycling, there's a greater call for infrastructure. And Jennifer Veach, along the same lines, notes that car ownership, she thinks at least, maybe you can comment on this, in Denmark, is discouraged through taxation policies. Do you think that's also important?
We have pretty high taxes for cars, about 150% on top of the value of the car. But you still have a pretty high car ownership, both in Denmark and the Netherlands. So that's not the full explanatory reason. Like people have, like, we have a pretty high car ownership. But yeah, there's something about the advocacy aspect that you get more users, and then it's like a snowball effect that you ask for safe infrastructure. Yeah, but another argument for getting going, I guess.
Absolutely. And I'm going to direct a question towards Rebecca and Tim. I'm afraid I'm going to pronounce your name incorrectly. Vidhya Ganesan asks, could you describe more about how the users adopted the game in the first place in managing their energy use? Can you share an example of how users use the game to manage their energy use, like thermostats or washers or dryers? Was that a thing?
Yeah, so look, within the game, at the end of each game session, there was a key message that was displayed on the screen. So there's 15 scaffolding messages across each particular behavior. And those game scaffold messages were reviewed 64,252 times, but an average of 98 times per player. So the concept is having a little, like one simple key message that is displayed and repeated again and again and again. And that's within the game message itself. And then there was other communications in terms of email campaigns, physical materials and rewards that said the same message, but through different channels. So the idea was that they were very simple and actionable activities that they could do, or behaviors. And then the idea was that was communicated across multiple channels.
Another example was keeping the air conditioner at 24 degrees, not 19 degrees. So giving a really set one that was optimal for human comfort, but also every degree makes a big difference in the energy consumption.
That's Celsius for those of you in the US.
Sorry.
Yes. If I do multiply it by 2 and add 30. So just Julia Wilson was also interested in that second part of the question, which is, how did you get people to do it in the first place? And how do you get them to keep doing it?
Yeah, do you mean recruit into the program? Because there's a whole drama around that.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. We only have a few minutes left. Could you touch on that in the short amount of time we have left?
Yeah, the first time we did it on recruited on Facebook, and it was a dismal failure, and we were like freaking out, going, "Oh my God, no, we spent all this money and no one's going to do it." What we found is we ran it in waves. So the first wave, we struggled over weeks and weeks to get people to participate. When we did it the second time, we actually sort of booked out within 24 hours. And what had happened is that the first wave had completed the program, had got the rewards, and suddenly we were a credible product that actually delivered on its promises. And so what happened was they then tagged all their friends to say, hey, you should do this program. And so we found that you need to start with a small group of people and prove yourself and become trusted. And then when that happens, it really snowballs and accelerates. So we thought we'll get a third in one wave, a third in another wave, a third, and it doesn't work like that. You start with about 10%, and then you then exponentially expand out when you've actually delivered on the promise. So I think that's a really important thing to sort of note when sort of doing the recruitment, is you can't just do it in equal sort of groups. You actually need to understand the snowballing effect.
And the importance of social norms emerges again. So thank you, Rebecca. And Jay, with one final note, do you think you could, there's a lot of people asking about resources, and do you want to just give one more plug to the Tools of Change website and just let us know where we could get more information if folks want to do their own community-based social marketing activities and whatnot?
Absolutely. I'm going to put 2 in here. So Tools of Change. And since Doug is also on the line, I'm going to put in www.cbsm.com. And that's another great resource. Well, it shouldn't be a comma there. It should be cbsm.com. I'll do that.
And I will note that we don't advocate for-profit organizations, for people to, we're not trying to advertise here, but this is actually a tool that might be a useful resource for folks on the line who want to implement that.
And there's no charge to use either of these 2 websites. There is a common good.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you to everybody. Thank you very much for Jay for putting together Tools of Change and finding these fantastic case studies for us. Thank you to Henrik for giving us guidance on increasing cycling, and Rebecca and Tim getting people to reduce energy use through gamification. I want to remind everybody that we're going to be back here March 15th for another fantastic presentation, this free BECC webinar series, and of course the conference is coming up. Submit your abstracts before April 1st. Go to beccconference.org, beccconference.org for all the information you need. Thanks so much, and I will see you next month.